Officer Jake Reynolds, a young, arrogant and racist cop, is patrolling a quiet neighborhood when he spots an elderly black man, James Carter, struggling with a bag near his car. Without asking questions, Reynolds aggressively approaches, accusing James of loitering or attempting a crime. James, a retired war veteran, calmly explains he's just trying to put his groceries in his car. Reynolds ignores him and demands identification, but James left his wallet at home. Frustrated, Reynolds escalates the situation, shoving James against the car, cuffing him roughly and calling for backup. James protests, mentioning his years of service, but Reynolds mocks him, dismissing his claims. A small crowd gathers, some recording the incident. Despite protests from bystanders who recognize James as a respected community member, Reynolds forces him into the police car. As backup arrives, one officer recognizes James and hesitates, but Reynolds insists he's taking him to the station. At the station, the police chief, Michael Carter, is called in. When he arrives and sees his father bruised and in cuffs, he's furious and demands an explanation. James, still composed, says, "Son, this young man thinks I'm a criminal." Reynolds realizes his mistake too late as everyone in the room stares at him in shock. Chief Carter steps forward, his face a mix of shock and fury as he stares at his father, bruised, humiliated and still in handcuffs. The room falls silent. Officers who had once respected Reynolds now look at him with disgust, realizing the gravity of his actions. Reynolds, previously so sure of himself, begins to shift uncomfortably, sensing the shift in power. With controlled rage, Chief Carter demands an explanation. Reynolds stammers, trying to justify his actions, saying he was just doing his job, and that James was being uncooperative. Carter cuts him off. His voice is cold and firm as he orders another officer to remove the cuffs from his father. James rubs his sore wrists but remains composed, his years of military training keeping his emotions in check. "Son, this young man thinks I'm a criminal," James finally says, his voice carrying the weight of disappointment rather than anger. Carter exhales sharply, rubbing his temples. He turns to Reynolds. "You arrested my father?" Carter asks, his voice dangerously low. "My father, a war hero, a man who fought for this country while people like you sit behind a badge and abuse the very rights he defended." Reynolds swallows hard. He opens his mouth to speak, but Carter cuts him off. "You didn't even check his ID, did you? You didn't listen. You saw a black man, and that was enough." The tension in the room is suffocating. Other officers exchange nervous glances. Some had already seen the videos circulating online, recorded by bystanders at the scene. The department's reputation is on the line, and Carter knows it. He turns to his father apologizing, not just as a son, but as the leader of the department that failed him. James nods, understanding, but his eyes hold years of pain. "This isn't just about me, Michael. It's about how many others have been through this and didn't have someone in their corner." Carter knows his father is right. This isn't an isolated incident. This is systemic. And now the world is watching. Within hours the story spreads. News stations pick up the footage, and social media erupts in outrage. Protesters gather outside the police station demanding justice, not just for James but for every victim of racial profiling and police brutality. Carter is forced to hold a press conference, condemning the actions of Officer Reynolds and announcing an immediate internal investigation. The department moves quickly. Reynolds is placed on immediate suspension. As the review unfolds, more of his past incidents come to light. Complaints from other black citizens who had been harassed, stopped, and treated unfairly. The evidence is overwhelming. Within weeks, Reynolds is officially terminated. His badge stripped from him. But the impact of the incident doesn't stop there. The city's leadership is pressured to implement stronger anti-racism training, and Carter pushes for policy changes to ensure no officer can act with such blatant disregard for human rights again. Officers are required to undergo de-escalation training, and body camera policies are reinforced to prevent unchecked abuse of power. Despite the public outrage, James remains steadfast. He refuses to let anger consume him. Instead, he works alongside activists and police reform groups, sharing his story and advocating for meaningful change. When asked if he wants to press charges against Reynolds, James shakes his head. Firing him was the right decision, but the real fight isn't against one bad cop. It's against a system that allows bad cops to thrive. Months later, Carter visits his father at home. They sit on the porch, watching the sunset, the weight of everything still heavy on their shoulders. "You know, Dad," Carter says, "I thought I was doing enough. I thought being a good cop, a good chief, was enough to change things." James sighs, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "It's a start. But change doesn't come easy. You just have to keep pushing, even when it's hard." Carter nods. He knows this is just the beginning. But for the first time in a long time he feels hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the world his father fought for and suffered for might finally become a reality. A year after the incident, the changes in the police department are noticeable. Officers undergo mandatory de-escalation and racial bias training, and the newly established Civilian Oversight Board ensures accountability. Complaints of racial profiling decrease, and the relationship between the police and the community slowly improves. James continues to be an advocate for justice, speaking at schools, community centers, and police training sessions. He shares his experience not to condemn all officers but to highlight the deep-rooted issues that need to be addressed. His voice carries weight, and even those who once ignored the problem begin to listen. Chief Carter, now seen as a reformer, faces both praise and resistance. Some officers resist the new policies, but he remains firm. He knows the only way forward is through real change, not just words. He works closely with community leaders, ensuring that the police serve the people rather than intimidate them. One day, Carter visits his father at his favorite park, where James watches children play. "It's been a long road," Carter says, sitting beside him. James nods. "Change takes time. But we've come a long way." Carter looks around at the peaceful scene, the same neighborhood where his father was once humiliated. Things aren't perfect, but they are better. And as long as people keep fighting for what's right, progress will continue. As they sit in silence, a young black boy runs up to James, recognizing him from a speech at school. "Thank you for what you did," the boy says. "You made things better." James smiles, patting the boy's shoulder. "No, son. We all did. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more stories like this, be sure to subscribe and follow us.